They never punched her or slammed her down. They didn't need to. Instead, they slowly slid a training blade along the front of her uniform shirt, cutting it open on purpose, not to injure her, but to shame her. 3 men in a narrow corridor with nobody else around. 3 bodies too close, treating a lone woman like she existed for their amusement. And the quiet she held, they foolishly mistook for surrender. They tried calling it correction, tried labeling it form adjustment, but anyone with sense would have recognized it for what it truly was: harassment wrapped in a uniform. What they didn't realize was that the woman they'd cornered was a Navy SEAL, and before the training knife even clattered onto the floor, all 3 of them were already on their backs, disarmed, stunned, finished. Before we show you the move she made next, the one that froze an entire base into silence, drop a comment with your location, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell, because on Major Tom's Tales today, she didn't require backup, just a single reason to act. Thick humidity pressed low over the packed dirt as if trying to prove something. Boots hitting in perfect rhythm against the rising heat. 100 voices chanting together while muscles strained beneath worn fatigues, and the sun pushed up over the eastern fence line of the Joint Warfare Conditioning Facility. This wasn't the polished parade deck at Annapolis. This wasn't one of those sandy SEAL prep sites in Florida. It was one of the rare forward-integrated Marine Navy cross-branch stations built specifically to generate friction, and you could feel that tension lifting off the ground like static. Combat readiness here wasn't a concept. It was bruises, muscle memory, and repetition. Rubber blades clacked across the mats, dried training blood smeared into old stains, and names were barked with clipped precision. No speeches were handed out when your face hit the floor, no rank traded when you were pinned. Just pressure, resistance, and whoever stayed upright by the end. She didn't say a word as she waited at the edge of the yard, blending in with the mixed unit for the day, still and silent. Her regulation shirt was neatly folded at the wrists, dog tags hidden, hair trimmed close along the nape. The uniform looked clean but worn in, washed so many times that faint scarring stretched across the elbow seam. No stripes on her collar, no identifying patches, no name tag, only a numbered armband above her elbow. That anonymity was intentional. This place ran on blind integration, a testing ground where even officers went unnamed unless they couldn't keep up. Someone behind her muttered just loudly enough to cut through the instructor shouting warm-up orders. Logistics? Admin? Maybe. Doubt she's here for grappling. Another voice snickered. Doesn't look like she can carry a charge, never mind a weapon. Probably some paperwork overflow. They send those non-combat types to watch and scribble notes. She didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't give them even a fraction of attention. The 3 men behind her, young, broad-shouldered, and buzzing with the kind of restless energy that spikes when they think nobody's watching, kept running their mouths. One leaned in just enough to let his whisper carry. Bet she's not even active duty anymore. Look at her stance. Arms crossed like she's bracing herself. They were wrong, naturally, but she didn't bother correcting them. She didn't need their approval. She only needed to be present. Then the drills kicked off. High knees, drop rolls, shuttle crawls, sandbag drags, groups of 10 rotating into melee sets, grappling with escalating resistance, knife defense patterns, mock takedowns. She landed in the second rotation, and that same trio fell in with her. The tallest, a corporal with a dark buzz cut, flashed a grin when he realized they'd been paired. Great, guess I'm babysitting. She gave a single blink, face blank, body loose, offering nothing threatening. The instructor barked the command. Start. He charged, and she slid aside, letting him stumble past. Reset. On the second go, she let herself drop softly, almost as if she'd slipped on her own footing. The other two snickered. One of them called out, "Easy, don't snap her in half, Eli." When the sequence wrapped, she stayed silent. The corporal reached out a hand to help her up, but she rose on her own without touching him. A tiny detail, but he caught it. So did the others. By the 8th drill of the morning, a story had already started circling through their row. She was passive, unreactive, delicate. Nobody had seen her push back, not even once. And silence like that fed a certain kind of ego. They weren't wondering why she kept her cool. They were letting their confidence swell unchecked, drifting quickly toward the kind of boldness that was about to cross into something far more dangerous. The sun kept climbing, cooking the gravel until the heat pushed back up through every boot on the yard. Sweat soaked into collars. Uniforms stuck to skin, and the air carried that metallic tang of dust and hard effort. With it came that familiar slip in discipline, the kind that creeps in when leadership drifts just far enough away that people think no one's paying attention. That's when the mood changed. The corporal, Eli Varon, as one of his buddies had casually mentioned earlier, stopped pretending to hide how he watched her. His stare wasn't respectful or even curious. It was the measuring look of someone who considered her something to be sized up for his amusement rather than seen as an equal. His two friends mirrored him, the broad one with a jaw that locked every time he laughed, and the wiry one with sharp eyes who clearly confused swagger for authority. During the rotating drills, they closed in on her, crowding her space until their elbows brushed her ribs whenever the formation reset. At first, it passed as accidental, the type of contact you could explain away: tight ranks, limited room, shoulders brushing as people moved past. But it didn't stay that way. Eli nudged into her side, not hard enough to draw attention, just enough to claim space he had no right to. When she didn't react or even blink, he smirked, encouraged by her silence. The bigger one followed up by pushing his knee lightly into the back of her thigh during a crouch drill, pretending he'd simply lost his balance. "Easy," he murmured, feigning concern. "You might get hurt out here." She didn't take the bait. Her breathing stayed steady, her gaze fixed ahead, calm, controlled, unwavering. That quiet held more power than anger ever would, and it irritated them. Later, during a short pause near the hydration table, the leaner one let his eyes drift slowly over her uniform, the gesture deliberate and disrespectful. "You always keep your shirt that snug?" the lean one asked, voice casually tossed out just loud enough for nearby trainees to catch it, but soft enough to stay under the radar of official misconduct. A few heads turned, but nobody stepped in. No one wanted to trigger a scene that might drag them into trouble, and guys like him knew exactly how to hover right below the threshold of command attention. "Maybe she's trying to show us something," Eli Varon chimed in, barely hiding the smirk tugging at his mouth. "You know, motivation." The others chuckled, low and unchallenged. She took a slow sip of water and moved back into position without a word. The instructors shifted to transitional drills, sending them toward a narrow corridor beside the equipment bay, a dim stretch where old mats, wooden training weapons, and shadows bled together under flickering utility lights. It saw constant use, but almost no supervision. That's exactly where the trio tightened their formation around her. Not touching yet, just shaping themselves into a loose circle, cutting off her angles, talking too close. Building a sense of control they believed no one would question. "You knew that, right?" the broad-shouldered one asked as they walked beneath the overhang, his tone dripping with the assumption that his statements didn't need answers. She gave a small nod. "Thought so," he said. "Out here we fix each other. Gear, form, posture. Might look rough if you're not used to it, but That's how it goes. His eyes drifted down along the seam of her shirt, the gesture slow and intentional. Sometimes, Eli Varon added, you don't realize what's wrong until somebody shows you. There was no joke in his tone, just implication, the sort that slips in when men convince themselves the hierarchy tilts their way, and quiet equals consent. She shifted her stance by a fraction, not stepping back or forward, simply adjusting the geometry between their bodies. A tiny recalibration only someone, trained in spatial awareness, would even notice. The others felt it instinctively, though they couldn't have said why. The lean one let out a quick scoff. Relax, she's not going to say a thing. Look at her, face like stone, probably trained not to make noise. That last word, noise, hung heavier than it should have, drifting between them as drills transitioned again. The instructors' voices bounced off the concrete further down the corridor, calling out the next rotation, but the trio eased their pace just enough to let the rest of the group pull ahead, just enough to leave her on her own. The rope station rig blocked the line of sight. She wasn't hidden, simply unobserved, which made it the perfect pocket for whatever they'd already decided to do next. And she felt it. She didn't break away or pick up speed. She just kept moving forward, fully aware of how men like this escalated when unchecked, and how quickly swagger grew when nobody pushed back. Her calm stayed steady, unbroken, even as their confidence swelled with every silent second, because what they mistook for surrender was really control held tight, waiting for the exact moment to ignite. The corridor pinched narrower as the trainees funneled deeper into the equipment wing, fluorescent lights flickering above them and casting washed-out reflections over stacked mats, bundled harnesses, and rows of rubberized training blades lined with clinical neatness. The instructor's shouts faded behind the concrete divider, close enough to hear if someone yelled, far enough that no one would catch a quiet situation turning wrong. The trio eased their pace again, and she matched it. They didn't block her path. Instead, they steered her with the kind of instructional phrasing that sounded perfectly normal in a place like this. "Hold up a sec," Eli Varon said, motioning toward an open patch near the gear rack. "Your posture's off. Hard to engage right when you're standing like that." The words were reasonable, tone familiar, the sort used hundreds of times during morning drills. She shifted slightly, enough to seem receptive, enough to keep them confident. The broad one moved up, arms loose, a thin grin cutting across his face. "Your shoulders are too tight," he murmured. "You tense up every time you move. We'll show you the right angle." The leaner one reached to the shelf and grabbed a training knife. Rubber, dull, designed for practice but rigid enough to make a point. He spun it lightly between his fingers like it was nothing. "Hey, relax," he said, voice almost playful. "Just a demo. You'll feel where the weak spot is." Then he stepped in closer, close enough that heat gathered in the narrow gap between them, a space that was never meant to be shared under false pretenses. The blade drifted along the fabric of her uniform, tracing the line across her chest. Not lethal, not even threatening, just intentional, slow, and unmistakably deliberate. It was slow, loaded, and suggestive, a violation dressed up as a training correction. The other two watched with tightening smirks as the tension climbed. "See?" Eli Varon murmured. "Too stiff. Fabric bunches right here. You've got to loosen up." And then the blade dug, not into her skin but straight into the shirt. A clean, deliberate slice ran from her collarbone downward, not deep, not harmful, but absolutely degrading. The torn fabric sagged, a thin horizontal rip spreading across the seam as the entire atmosphere shifted. For an instant, the corridor went silent. Then a soft, ugly laugh broke it, encouraging, then emboldening. you should be grateful," the lean one added, mouth curling. "Most don't get this kind of attention." "Yeah," Eli chimed in. "Call it hands-on mentorship." Her eyes lifted, and for the first time that morning their bravado hesitated. Something in her expression sharpened, not anger, not fear, just pure focus, a razor-bright recalculation. She raised one hand, pinched the torn fabric together, adjusted it almost formally, as if correcting her own uniform. Then she said a single word: "Step back." It wasn't loud, but it carried weight that pressed against the concrete walls. The big one gave a low scoff. "You don't like how we teach?" The leaner one twirled the rubber knife lazily between his fingers. "Relax, this is part of learning." She didn't repeat herself. Her tone didn't rise or toughen. It sliced cleanly through the narrow space like an order embedded into the air itself. "Step back." Eli smirked again, falling into the reflex he trusted too much. "Or what?" The question drifted in the corridor like steam. For a brief, suspended second, everything went still. No shouts, no footsteps, just 3 men far too close and 1 woman standing perfectly poised. And then, beneath her posture, something shifted. A slight pivot of her foot, a subtle shift in her shoulders, a steady inhale, not fear, but readiness. The training knife froze mid-spin as the lean one tilted his head, sensing something change but unable to grasp what. "What?" he began, but the question never finished. In the fraction of space between his breath and the word, her hand was already in motion. Not rushed, not panicked, not emotional. Executed with cold precision. The corridor seemed to brace itself for the moment when arrogance finally met discipline. The instant he'd said "or what," her world had narrowed to calculation. Her left foot slid 6 inches back, weight anchored, shoulders aligned in perfect balance. She drew a single controlled breath through her nose, her gaze fixed not on his expression but on the triangle between his wrist, elbow, and the handle of the knife. His posture exposed everything. Elbow loose, shoulders cocky, stance too square. The blade flicked once more in his hand. That was all she needed. She moved, no theatrics, no flourish. Pure technique. Her right hand shot up and locked around his wrist mid-spin, not with brute strength but with exact anatomical leverage, twisting the joint into hyperextension before his nerves even registered danger. The knife hit the floor with a dull clatter. Her left hand followed immediately, palm striking under his chin. Not to injure, but to lift his weight off his foundation. He stumbled back, off balance but not quite down. That's when she ended it. She rotated behind him, hooking his arm across her hip in a clean, textbook control throw, one perfected in dim training rooms overseas. He slammed into the concrete with a muted thud, air punched out of his lungs, nerves scrambled, control gone. He hadn't even finished blinking when she turned toward the next threat. The big one lunged, but far, far too late. He reached for her torn shirt, as if grabbing the fabric could somehow pull back the control he'd already lost, but she caught his forearm mid-swing and shifted with it, letting his own weight betray him. Her heel hooked behind his calf, and his momentum sent him crashing forward. She drove him into the stacked mats, twisting his arm behind his back in a restraint that wouldn't hurt unless he fought it. He fought, so she tightened the lock until something in his shoulder gave a muted pop. Not a break, just a recalibration of his entitlement. Eli Varon froze where he stood, smirk still on his face but body no longer daring to move. His ego hadn't processed what his eyes had just witnessed. "You done?" she asked, voice quiet but firm, the only moment she let her tone rise above a whisper. Eli's gaze darted between them, one man gasping on the ground, one pinned and twisted in the mats, the third lying stunned, blinking like he'd just woken from a nightmare. Eli stepped, not toward her, but toward the dropped knife. A mistake. Her boot landed on his hand mid-reach, not a kick, just a firm step that pinned him without crushing. He flinched. Okay, I'm done. She still wasn't breathing hard. He stared up at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as someone to toy with, not as something beneath him, but as something he couldn't begin to comprehend. Behind them, the leaner man groaned, the knife bumping harmlessly across the floor. She lifted it, balanced it on her palm, studied the dull edge that had sliced into her shirt. Blunt, but pointed enough for humiliation. Then she set it neatly onto the nearest shelf and turned to face all three. "This is your only warning," she said, voice steady and cold as a breath through a sniper scope. "You won't get another." Footsteps suddenly echoed from the main corridor, quick, sharp, deliberate. Instructors, MPs. Someone had noticed the gap in rotation. Someone had sounded the alarm. She stepped back from the heap of shattered ego and reset her posture to neutral. When the instructors rounded the corner and saw the scene, one man wheezing, one stunned into stillness, one crumpled against the mats, and her standing upright with her torn shirt held closed in one hand, the entire hallway froze. An instructor snapped, "What the hell happened here?" She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead of answering, she looked directly at the officer in front of her, extended her ID wallet in silence, and simply waited for the room to catch up to reality. The instructors froze mid-stride. Two MPs rushed in behind them, their boots cracking sharply against the floor, hands instinctively drifting toward their belts as they surveyed the scene. 3 Marines in various stages of collapse, and one woman standing steady, shirt torn, sweat darkening her sleeves, posture firm as if nothing about any of this required concern. "Somebody talk," the lead instructor barked. "Now." No one did. The big one curled against the mats managed a weak, pained mumble about a misunderstanding. Training that got out of hand. The lean one tried pushing himself upright, only to drop again with a low groan. Eli Varon stood with his hand slightly raised, breath shallow, staring at her like the very rules of gravity had shifted. A junior MP stepped forward. "Ma'am, we'll need to separate you and take statements." Her expression didn't change. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the black ID wallet, and offered it to the senior instructor with a calm, almost surgical precision. Gunnery Sergeant Holt Kincaid, 2 decades in command and long past patience for testosterone-fueled disasters, snatched it with the annoyance of a man expecting to file more paperwork. Then he opened it and stopped breathing. His eyes locked on the top clearance strip, then moved slowly down the page, where a name, photo, and serial number should have been. Instead, there were acronyms and classifications meant only for ranks above his. The air in the corridor shifted instantly. Kincaid looked up sharply. "What's your name, ma'am?" She stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but absolute. "Commander Liana Cross, Naval Special Warfare, Tier 1 Evaluation." No need to raise her tone. The words carried on their own. The MPs straightened instinctively. Kincaid stepped back. Eli Varon's face drained to ash. "Tier 1, the younger MP whispered before Kincaid cut him off. "Secure this corridor. Get medical here and move these 3 to isolation. No communication, none. No statements, no leaks, just move. That's an order." The MPs snapped into action. Not because they grasped the full scope of what was happening, but because something in Gunnery Sergeant Holt Kincaid's voice had shifted from irritation to something they almost never heard from him: fear. Commander Liana Cross adjusted the torn edges of her shirt, buttoning what she could. It didn't fix the rip, but it closed the moment. "Commander," Kincaid said, straightening his stance, "do you need medical attention?" "No." "Do you intend to press charges?" "I don't file," she said quietly. "I recommend." She tipped her head toward the three men being hauled upright, groaning under their own weight. "And my recommendation is you call your base commander." She walked past them, not rushed, not proud, simply finished. And behind her, the hallway collectively exhaled, as if it had forgotten how until she moved. The base commander arrived in under 6 minutes. Rear Admiral Ryland Mercer wasn't known for handling minor problems personally, but the second Kincaid reported what had happened, especially who had handed him that black-sealed ID, Mercer got into his own vehicle and drove from the officer's wing at a speed that ignored every posted limit between HQ and the training facility. He didn't speak when he entered the corridor. He didn't ask for an explanation. His gaze swept the scene in one long, measured pass. The three Marines now sat separated along the far wall, MPs positioned beside each of them, medics finishing quick assessments. Their bodies were banged up but intact. Their faces, though, told a different story. The blank, stunned, hollow look of men who finally understood how far they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Commander Liana Cross stood near the torn mats, arms folded over her repinned shirt, still and silent. Her posture hadn't shifted an inch. "Commander Cross," Mercer said evenly, "walk with me?" She didn't salute. With her clearance level, protocol changed shape around her. Instead, she fell in beside him as they moved down the corridor into a sealed meeting room at the edge of the training zone. No one else followed. The door shut behind them. Outside, Kincaid paced. MPs murmured under their breath. The injured men stayed quiet. Inside, it took Admiral Mercer all of 10 seconds to scan the remainder of her credentials. His eyes stopped at the line-stamped NSWC SEAL Team Evaluation Officer, Tier 1 clearance, SOCOM-attached asset. His hands froze. When he finally looked up, his voice was low. "They had no idea who you were." "They never asked," she replied. Mercer exhaled slowly. "God help them." Liana Cross leaned in just a fraction. "I'm not looking for God, Admiral. I'm looking for systems that stop shielding men like that just because they shout louder than everyone else in formation." "I understand," he said. "No, sir," she answered, calm but unyielding. "With respect, you don't. Because this isn't the first time something like this happened on your base. It's just the first time the target happened to be someone capable of putting 3 of them down before the 4th had time to blink." Mercer nodded, no defensiveness in him, only the sinking weight of responsibility settling deeper into his spine. "They'll be processed immediately," he said. "Medical isolation, suspension from duty, pending investigation." "There won't be an investigation," Cross said evenly. "There will be a review, transfers, and a full security audit. And if all of that isn't underway within 48 hours, I escalate straight to SOCOM oversight." Mercer winced. "You weren't here just to observe, were you?" "I was," she replied, "until a training knife cut open my uniform." He fell silent. She rose, voice steady as ever. "My rank doesn't protect me, Admiral. Being dangerous does. What should protect your Marines is leadership." Mercer straightened. "What do you want from me?" "Everything," she said. "Access files, personnel histories, complaints, transfers. Open your books, and I'll show you what this base actually is." She moved toward the door. "And when the others find out who you are, they won't need to," she said over her shoulder. "They'll know the moment things start changing." When she stepped back into the corridor, something rolled through the hallway like a silent signal. No one spoke, But every man in uniform straightened instinctively, because it no longer mattered what rank she wore. Everyone understood who held the authority now. The debrief room was small, a windowless, steel-paneled box off the command corridor with a scarred table, 2 chairs, and a fan that clicked every 7 seconds like a broken metronome. By the time Commander Liana Cross sat across from the base's senior personnel officer and internal investigator, MPs had already secured the hallway outside, and the files she'd requested were being printed in another room. She didn't need legal counsel. She didn't need a rehearsed statement. What she needed was a timeline. "Start with the last 18 months, she said, her voice flat. "Formal complaints, informal ones, transfer requests from female personnel, and any injuries logged during combatives where no incident report was filed." Lieutenant Felix Rowan looked like he wanted to explain, maybe justify something, but a single glance from Admiral Ryland Mercer shut that instinct down immediately. Commander Liana Cross opened the first report. 3 names, 3 ranks, 3 women, who had either transferred off the base or filed misconduct reports only to withdraw them later, all tied to the same 3 men. Her tone stayed clinical. "These 3 you're holding tonight weren't an anomaly. They were guaranteed." Mercer nodded grimly. "The previous complaints were mishandled, buried at unit level." "No," she corrected softly. "Not buried. Ignored." She tapped another report. This one, Lance CPL Mara Kessler, documented being cornered in the equipment wing. Same corridor, same behavior, one of the same assailants. Her statement was overwritten after a peer counseling intervention. She let the comment sit like a weight in the room. Rowan sank slightly into his chair. Cross flipped to the next file. Another. Sergeant Tessa Jorrell was ordered to strip for a gear evaluation by 2 senior corporals during unsupervised drills. One of them was Eli Varon. Mercer closed his eyes for a moment. "These aren't anomalies," she continued. "This is a pattern, an entire hierarchy built on plausible deniability. You've got a wolf pack in uniform and a system that feeds them by training victims to second-guess themselves before reporting." Mercer didn't bother arguing. He only nodded. "Your assessment?" She met his eyes directly. "This base has a culture problem. Not just discipline, not just a handful of predators. A culture that's easier to ignore until someone suffers or disappears." She rose. "I'll file a Tier 1 recommendation to SOCOM by the end of the week. Full oversight review, personnel reshuffling, and a mandatory culture realignment officer embedded here for at least 6 months. Mercer stood with her. "And you?" She lifted her ID wallet. "I'll remain here, quietly, watching." Rowan cleared his throat. "Commander, permission to ask, what are you really here for?" Cross didn't look at him. Her answer was aimed at the Admiral. To end the lie that loudness equals strength and intimidation equals leadership. Then she turned toward the door. "Let the base know," she added as the door lock clicked open behind her. "This wasn't retaliation, it was restraint, and I'm done using it." By morning, the entire installation felt different. Not visibly, not in any official capacity. No alarms, no memos, no emergency briefings, but in the way silence stretched across the barracks and corridors. A charged, knowing quiet carried in glances between Marines whose boots looked just a bit more polished than usual. Everyone sensed something significant had gone down. They just didn't yet understand the scale of the shift. At 0600, the chow hall hummed with low speculation. Rumors had already circled through half the platoons. A fight in the training wing, MPs called in, 3 Marines dragged to medical isolation. But when the names started floating, Eli Varon, Marcus Reddick, Jesse Calder, the tone in the room changed. Those were names everyone recognized. Men who drifted too freely between units, laughed too loudly around certain women, and always seemed to walk away untouched whenever complaints dissipated under paperwork and peer reviews. No one said it aloud, but the collective relief was unmistakable. Commander Liana Cross didn't show for breakfast. She didn't need to. Her presence traveled ahead of her now like a new gravitational pull, straightening the posture of people who had grown accustomed to slouching beneath unchecked behavior. At 800, she was spotted near the main armory, speaking quietly with the weapons officer about inventory protocols. By Aero 930, she stood observing Marine Combatives refresher drills, and the instructors' stances snapped subtly sharper the moment they realized she was watching. By midday, a discreet memo slid through the command office. All refresher evaluations would now be reviewed by an external authority, unnamed but marked with a clearance band few had ever seen. Some Marines shrugged it off, pretending she was just another Navy integration officer. Others lowered their voices, suddenly aware that careless words traveled now. But among the women on base, the news moved fast. Private Nira Solis passed it to Corporal Dana Keene in the motor pool. It was her. She dropped them like wet sandbags. Sergeant Tessa Joro, usually eating alone, found 2 junior female cadets quietly sitting beside her, something that hadn't happened in weeks. And in the comms room, when a technician whispered, "That quiet woman from drills yesterday, she's why command is rewriting protocol." The tone wasn't fear, it was gratitude. The shift didn't arrive with marching orders or public discipline. It came with the understanding that the woman walking across the lot in a clean, rankless reissued shirt had accomplished what nobody else had managed. She changed the entire balance of the base, not by pulling rank, but by acting when it counted. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like the walls were paying attention. She walked the perimeter just after 1300 hours. No escort, no clipboard, no radio. Just the steady rhythm of her boots along the cracked asphalt running the length of the southern training compound. One hand clasped behind her back, the other swinging loose at her side. Her shirt was new, standard-issue fatigues, crisp and rankless, but her expression hadn't changed, and neither had her stride. Not triumphant, not angry, just focused. She passed 2 groups of Marines mid-rotation. One formation stuttered for a split second, not enough to draw attention, just enough to reveal who'd noticed her. Eyes followed her for 3, maybe 4 seconds, before the cadence tightened and snapped back into cleaner sync. She paused near the obstacle tower as 3 instructors adjusted rope rigs. One turned, froze briefly, then nodded. She returned the gesture with a single short nod. On the west side of the yard, near the stacked CQB dummies, a young officer, maybe 25 at most, instinctively straightened when he saw her. No salute. He didn't know her rank, but instinct filled in the blanks. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "base feels different today." Commander Liana Cross studied him. "Then look closer," she replied. The base didn't change, the silence did. He didn't follow up, he didn't need to. She kept walking. Inside the main admin wing, a door creaked open as she passed. The junior personnel clerk who'd brushed her off the day before now stood ramrod straight just inside the frame, eyes wide, unsure whether to speak. She didn't slow. She moved past him like water, quiet, steady, and absolutely impossible to ignore. By 1400 hours, her presence was logged at the training review desk. By 1600, she had requested full observation access for all Marine combatives rotations through the end of the week. No objections, no questions. The approvals came stamped by command, signed above her, not by her. And by evening, Chow, her name wasn't being asked anymore. It was being respected. Not feared, respected. Because when Commander Liana Cross sat alone at the corner table, boots tucked under the bench, meal simple, posture unreadable, no one intruded. No one whispered. No one forgot. One controlled motion had ended 3 careers, but the way she executed it, the restraint she'd shown, the precision she delivered, that's what lingered. That's what rewired the base. If someone crossed that line with you, would you have stayed calm, or would you have snapped? And do you think those 3 Marines finally learned the difference between intimidation and actual strength? If a Navy SEAL like her walked into your unit tomorrow, would anyone recognize who she really was before it was too late? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every one of them. If this story made you stop and think, hit that like button, subscribe, and make sure the bell icon's on so you never miss a story like this. We post true tension, earned respect, and justice-delivered stories every single day. And if someone in your circle still believes silence equals weakness, send them this. When the next video shows up on your screen, click it. We'll see you tomorrow.